Granite Talks. Conversations from Aberdeen is co-hosted by Anna Dvorakova, Nila Lohith Mudgalia, Raul Placencia, and Thomas Scooty. Co-produced by Ewan Smith and Thomas Scooty.
Hello, Mark, or should I call you Marcus? What would you prefer I call you?
I don't mind. My mum calls me Mark, and most people in the Gaelic and literature communities call me Marcas, so either's fine.
Sure. So I think I'll go with Marcus. It sort of reminds me of my Lithuanian past in a way, because the way Mark is written as Marcus is very similar to how Mark would be written in Lithuanian. So just for old time's sake, even. Right.
All right. That's nice.
Yeah. So I'll give a brief introduction about you. It might seem a bit weird to you at the moment, but this is for the show, obviously. So
Yeah.
Mark Spencer Turner, or as others in his native call him Marcus, Mark and Tuairneir, has been an impressive presence on the Scottish literary scene. His first work, Deo, in 2013, was published. Since then, he has gone on to be nominated 4 times for the Scottish National Gaelic Awards. And he has earned many more accolades and acclaims than I can even imagine to list over here. A brief introduction to him would be that he was an alumnus of our university at Aberdeen. How are you today?
No, I'm really well, thank you. I'm phoning from Edinburgh, and it's nice to be in touch with fellow students from the University of Aberdeen and to support what you're doing.
Thank you very much. It's all appreciated. And let me begin with my first question to you. I read on your bio that you were born in York. So where did the inspiration to pursue Gaelic as a language come into you? Are your parents Gaelic, or you have always been fascinated by Scotland? How does it go for you?
Well, it's a bit of a meandering course. As far as I'm aware, the first time I became aware of the Gaelic language, I was on holiday as a young child, I think 3 years old, up in Pitlochry with my mum and dad. We would quite often go on family holidays to Ireland and Scotland, and I was found in front of the television watching Postman Pat in Gaelic, and I was completely enthralled, I think, so they tell me, by the idea of a television program that was obviously familiar to me in an Anglophone context being delivered through this other language. And but I think more widely from my own cultural background, a grandparent on each side of my family was born in Ireland. I was very much raised within the Irish diaspora community in the north of England, which I'm part of. As I was growing up, I went through school with a number of people, some of whom remain friends who are from a similar cultural background. I knew people who were second generation, third generation Irish and Scottish. And so there was always awareness of the Gaelic languages, the Celtic languages more widely. My parents, because this was during the 90s, really, when I was growing up, this kind of coincided with Ireland doing very well at Eurovision. Irish music coming to the fore, being more recognised in the UK charts, perhaps. Artists like the Cranberries, Sinead O'Connor, The Cause, folk music, more interest in that with the Woman's Heart compilations, Mary Black, Frances Black, artists like that. These are all around and about as I was getting brought up, and so it was an easy step sideways to encounter music in the Gaelic languages, both Irish and Scottish Gaelic. Key memories for me growing up were during the school run, listening to the tapes, Runrig, Capacele, as a child who was, fascinated by language in general, just trying to follow the lyrics on the liner notes, on the way to school.
Yeah.
And going to concerts and, getting to hear these bands and Irish bands and singers live, really contributed to a rich upbringing where I was allowed to encouraged to encounter my own heritage, my own diaspora culture and also that of the other Celtic nations. So when it came to choosing what subjects I wanted to do at university, initially I wanted to go to Ireland. I wanted to study at Trinity College in Dublin. And I considered Northern Ireland, but my mum had studied English at the University of Dundee. She'd had a great time up in Scotland, and so she recommended applying to Scottish universities. And so I chose to study what had been my favourite subjects at school: French, Spanish, and literature, but also to apply to places where I could include aspects of the Celtic languages in the curriculum. And so the Scottish MA system, with it being so open, particularly in the first and second year, was ideal for me. Somebody who wanted to, dip my toe into different languages and different literatures and different cultures. And so I went up to Aberdeen on an open day and met with Seamus Grant, who's no longer part of the Celtic department now, but and also Colin O'Boyle, who continues to be a professor emeritus. And we got into conversation with them, and also academics from the Hispanic department. And, it was a beautiful sunny day at King's College, and I absolutely fell in love with the architecture and just the ambience on campus. And it was very clear to me that Aberdeen was where I wanted to be, despite the fact, or maybe even because of the fact that it was so far away from home. It offered me freedom to kind of explore my interests and also have that distance from home, but also be on a direct railway line home to York down the East Coast. I shuttled back and forth for 7 years, and that was me.
That's amazing. That's great to know. Yeah, that was really nice. Right. Do you feel like you mentioned that you were part of the larger Irish diaspora? Do you feel others are in touch with their culture as much as you were able to get in touch with it? Or how do you see it these days?
I would say growing up in York, a lot of my close friends and family friends, from an Irish background and would, grow up going back every summer to visit family or to visit places, where our grandparents, great-grandparents had came from. So, yeah, that was fairly normal to me. And this idea of, belonging to multiple cultures was something that I shared with a lot of young people growing up. And it was something that was mirrored with my experience in the Celtic department in Aberdeen as well. Not so much in an Irish context, although there were people from a similar background to me studying at the time, but also people from the Scottish background who might have had Hebridean parents or grandparents, sometimes referred to as that lost generation, where there was a break in intergenerational transmission of the language, who were involved in a process of regaining the language through education, which has been one of the key roles of the Celtic department in Aberdeen and other universities latterly, as we cope with language shift with the Gaelic language. So, yeah, there was a lot of crossover and a lot of kind of shared lived experience that I found with Lowland Scots and second generation Highlanders and Islanders. And it was great to meet, native speaking Gaels as well. So, the classes that I was part of, I consider myself to be part of the international cohort. We had a lot of European students, even a lad from Japan studying Gaelic in my first and second year. And some Americans and Canadians too. So it was a really rich, mixed cohort with lots of different experiences. And we're all involved in the Celtic Society as well, which contributed completely to that experience.
That was amazing. So on a lighter note from me, are you part of any Scottish or Irish clans that you can let us or our audience know about?
In contemporary Irish context, I don't think society really looks at itself in that way anymore. I'm not part of a Scottish clan, as it were. I would say that in a contemporary context, we create the tribe that we want to be part of. You find your tribe.
Yes. Right. So we'll go to one of the first shared questions. So, can you share the inspiration behind your latest song or project? So, what are you up to these days, Marcus?
Well, over the last year or so, I've mainly been focusing on editing and translating. So it's been about bringing poetry from other um, poetic traditions into the Gaelic language, and finding a place for wider international context within the language. I've also worked with some newer writers, Katie Campbell, Marianne Kennedy, Victoria McKeever, just three of them. I've worked on them through various mentorship schemes with some of the Scottish literary organisations, bringing new voices into Gaelic poetry. And then prior to that, I published my latest collection, which was Polaris, which was original poetry that, again, similar kind of aims, looking to bring in narratives from across the North Atlantic archipelago into Gaelic literature for the first time, and to build links between other poets and representatives of other indigenous linguistic communities here through translation. And then at the same time, I released my album Spectrum, where I worked with various other collaborators, asserting a place for the Gaelic language within contemporary pop music. So there was there's been an element of cultural exchange across all of those projects in recent years.
That's amazing. Yeah. Speaking of that, how do you see the future of Gaelic music evolving? Like, what role do you hope to play in its continuation?
Well, I mean, this week it's very firmly in focus. Consultations come out from An Cumann Gaelbach, which is the organisation that runs the Royal National Mard. I'm the Gaelic tutor of Lothian Gaelic Choir, and our choir takes part every year in that National Gaelic Cultural Festival. And I've also taken part as a solo singer, as a songwriter, and as a poet as well. Last year, I was really thrilled to win the gold medal for Gaelic poetry in Paisley, so that was a career highlight. And the consultation at the moment is looking to how the Mard as a cultural institution is going to evolve and respond to contemporary Gaelic Scotland. So it's a contentious time, but it's also an exciting time. And so currently devising my response to that contribution. But I would say that in general, the contribution that I make is firstly through just expanding the Gaelic poetic canon as it is, continuing to contribute new poems and my own perspectives, to use this as a conduit to bring in other people's perspectives in so far as I can. It's been a really exciting time over the last few years with Gaelic songwriting as well, which is like a parallel poetic tradition in the contemporary Gaelic culture. I work quite a lot with Rachel Walker, who's based up in Lochabaid. We have a songwriting duo. And again, it's been great to see some of our new Gaelic songs being arranged and sung by Gaelic choirs and by other singers. So yeah, it's just about continuing to use creativity to enrich what's happening now, whilst also, maintaining that kind of respect and reverence for the tradition, the Gaelic tradition, and looking at how we can continue to not necessarily keep that relevant, but continue to be informed by it as we create new work. So it continues to be a really rich and inspiring time within the Gaelic arts in 2024.
That's very interesting. Yeah, like especially the work. Yeah, that's true. I totally agree with that. Could you tell us about any unique instruments that you come across when producing Gaelic music? Like, is it like other than the bagpipes, which everyone seems to associate with Scotland? So,
Right.
do you have anything new for us? Something that our audience might not know, or even me myself might not know about it?
Well, I would say with the Gaelic choirs, the majority of what we do is a cappella singing. Gaelic has a really strong tradition of unaccompanied singing, which has then over the last 200 years also begun to evolve. And so Gaelic choral music now has its own really vibrant tradition. I don't accompany myself when I sing. What I tend to do with the Gaelic pop music is to work with collaborators who will play a wide variety of instruments. But what Spectrum, my album, sought to do was to engage with electronic music. So working with synthesizers and with samples and you know all the hallmarks of electronic music that we find in pop music and dance music and R&B music in the Anglophone and Francophone and Hispanophone charts, for example. Well, across the world, really, to kind of, that project was a means to look at what's going on with popular music across the world and kind of look towards what a uniquely Gaelophone pop music could be, looking as well at what's happening with the tradition at the moment. You know, it's an exciting time working with the legacy of musicians like Martin Bennett, who came to the fore in the 1980s and 90s, incorporating traditional music into electronic music and vice versa. This has been carried forward with bands like Nightworks and Voltos and Peatbog Fairies across the Highlands and Hebrides, who've incorporated traditional music into electronic music. So my project was kind of about looking at it from the other way, incorporating the Gaelic language into pop music sensibilities and frameworks. And so for me, it wasn't so much about the traditional instruments of bagpipes, you know, flutes, fiddles, bowrons, in as such. It was mainly about taking the language, the poetry, the vocal tradition, and implanting that into a contemporary pop music framework.
Right, I get you. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm learning so many new things. It's really interesting speaking to you, Marcus. Honestly,
that's the joy of it all. It's a huge. As somebody who wasn't born within the Scottish Gaelic context, you know, this is all part of my, you know, my own personal creative development and education. You know what I mean? And so, one of the really enjoyable things of my work over the last decade, 15 years or so, is that, you know, constantly learning new words, constantly picking up new skills, and the uptick in, you know, Gaelic policy and provision across the board, you know, across society, has really facilitated people like me who come from, you know, different backgrounds as well as the traditional backgrounds as well. We've all been really able to expand our own potential as creatives and as speakers of the language. So that's to be championed, and hopefully it'll continue.
Right. If I may ask a sort of personal question from my side, how would you get a lay person who has no idea of this sort of culture and music? How would you get them into? How would you get them into it? Like, what would be like the first few works that you would recommend that they read or listen to, so that they sort of get a liking for it?
Well, I mean, there are so many ways to get involved. You know, the primary way I would say would be to engage with the music. You know, just tune in the radio to Radio and Gales and listen to the diversity of Gaelic music that's out there at the moment. Other community radio stations such as Radio Sky is a great one, or Celtic Music Radio are other great introductions to what's happening in a wider context as well. But as a student in Aberdeen, and obviously I'm talking to Aberdeen residents at the moment, the best thing you can do is get down to the Celtic Society, which is, you know, one of the oldest student societies at the university. when I was president, we were arranging ceilidhs every month and having traditional music sessions. And I know that this continues in different ways nowadays as well, with the conversation circle as well, informal ways for people to use the language and encounter the language, as well as through the arts. There's also a Gaelic choir in Aberdeen, which has been going for decades, and it's great to hear that there's been an uptake from students at the university who attended an open day fairly recently. And also there's the Gaelic Club in Aberdeen, which is a council-run initiative. It includes parents who've got children in Gaelic medium education and people more widely from the Gaelic speaking community in the city who organise classes, language classes, as well as other cultural events like ceilidhs and things like that. So if you're in Aberdeen, there's loads of opportunities to get involved. And I have to say that, my experience of living in Aberdeen, both as a student, but just also as somebody who became involved in the community, it set me up for life. And it's been the benchmark for how I have engaged with the community going through my adult life. So I owe a lot to what I experienced in Aberdeen, both in terms of my education, but also socially and what I picked up at community level.
That's great. Yeah, you've given us plenty to start getting into Gaelic culture. Yeah, thanks for that. Thank you once again. So, changing gears again, what are the specific places or landscapes that inspire your music, or do you receive much inspiration from landscape at all? Could you talk about some of your muses maybe?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Thank you. I think it's interesting because fairly recently I had to write my own biography or help somebody write my biography for the National Biography of Scottish Writers, which is due to come out soon, I understand. And I think that in terms of the way that my work is viewed, I'm very much positioned as an urban writer and an arts practitioner. And it's very true that, my experience of Scotland has been through living firstly in Aberdeen, then Glasgow, then Inverness, which albeit, Highland context, but an urban context, and now most recently in Edinburgh. So I understand that. And I would say that that's true. I don't necessarily position myself, I can't position myself as a Hebridean or a Highlander. And so I never really claim to speak for those heartland Gaelic communities. But I would hope that what I do gives voice to urban Gaelic communities. But saying that, with the development of the music on Spectrum, it was recorded for the most part at Watercolour Music, which, if you get the chance, please do visit over on the Ardgour Peninsula. It's in the shadow of Ben Nevis. The views are incredible. And so there are songs that were inspired by that Highland landscape, as well as the urban landscapes that are my home. Particularly the first track on the album, No Norse, I wrote there with Nick Turner, supported by his wife and my good friend Mary Ann Kennedy, who run the studio. And I would say that, the Highland landscape there, the Ardgour landscape, is in that song. But then there are other songs on Spectrum, particularly Edie, which is the last track, which is very much about Edinburgh, celebrating Gaelic in Edinburgh. So I would say that there's a mixture. There's more of a mixture on the album there than I would have expected when I first started with that project.
Is there a sort of fear of being stereotyped into that sort of landscape, Highlands, Hebridean sort of culture with the work you engage with or the work you create? Does that happen a lot?
I think that, when we look at the Anglophone media and how they position the Gaelic language and culture, it's always very much in terms of peripherality. The Hebrides is positioned on being on the edge of civilization, which is a fairly negative, unhelpful trope. If you are if you are from the Highlands or the Hebrides, it's the centre of your world, and everything spins around that axis. And I think that perhaps we could seek to redress that imbalance. For me, as I say, what I've been seeking to do is to explore the fact that Gaelic is very much part of life and culture in Scotland's cities and in an urban context, and to kind of dispel the myth that it's simply a rural language. However, what I would say is one of the really positive things that we've seen since the Gaelic Language Act of 2005 has been an upsurge in just pride in the language, pride in Highland and Hebridean and urban Gaelic cultural backgrounds, and a kind of an understanding that, the language is a broad church. Within that, there are multiple ways to embody the language. And so it's great to see that kind of Indigenous diversity working with other aspects of diversity within the community. As we get to a place where we're better representing EDI within a Gaelic context too. So I would say that we're at a turning point really with how the language is viewed both internally and externally, and with that, it's a really fertile position to be in, because some of the best creative work comes out of those conversations, tensions, and debates.
Yes, couldn't agree more, to be honest. Yeah. So coming to your work again, I read in your bio that you have translated 2 of Lawrence Schimmel's Rainbow books into Gaelic.
I did.
The first LGBTQ children's books to appear in the language. So I wanted to ask, how accepting of it were the Gaelic community? Were they conservative? Were they happy for it? In your opinion, how did that go down?
I think I have to give you a slightly longer answer than just the Rainbow books. I think that they represent, a landmark on the timeline, as it were. When I started writing, well, actually, we'll go back further. When I was doing my undergraduate degree in Gaelic, the most important module for me, really, that I did was Michelle MacLeod's module on contemporary Gaelic poetry, or contemporary as it was at the time. We were looking at the poetry of the 70s, 80s and 90s. And the only gay voice that there was at the time was Christopher White, who is a new speaker like me, originally from Glasgow, and also in common with me from an Irish Catholic background. And so his work was the only work that I, at that point, had encountered that expressed any kind of LGBTQ identity in the language, following on from, the model that was established, in the Victorian times, where we understand that, homosexuality is an identity as opposed to just a practice, shall we say, we can look back at older texts in a historical context, and we can give a queer reading to, historical literature as well, but it was the first kind of out and proud LGBT literature. And then that was what my MLit thesis considered when I was at the Institute of Irish and Scottish Studies there in the Humanities Mans. I wrote my thesis about homosexual identity and homoeroticism. That's right, in Christopher White's poetry. So that kind of started me off looking at the poetry of Babs McGregor, and also Ian S. Macpherson, who are other LGBT writers in the language. And so that meant that when I started publishing and writing, I was the second LGBT writer to publish a collection in Gaelic, in Gaelic poetry, and I was the fourth, I think, LGBT Gaelic poet to see my work in print. What we are seeing is that in terms of criticism, there hasn't really been any kind of long-form studies into LGBTQ literature in Gaelic yet, where we have seen that happening in Ireland, for example. So that would be, an aspect of scholarship that we do really need to start seeing. And I think that you can make your own conclusions from that absence. But what I would say is that in the 20 years that I've been involved, we've seen incredible change and acceptance. I think that queer Gaelic speakers are really starting to be seen in the media, our work starting to be appreciated and normalized within culture. So all of that kind of led me to the place where we were in a position to be able to translate Lawrence's works, and where I've been able to see my own adult literature, recognised on shortlists for national awards, something that might not necessarily have happened 20 years ago. I don't know. But the proof is in the pudding. And actually, when I look at the younger generations of people coming through Gaelic medium education and studying at university level, who are very, very comfortable talking about their LGBTQ identities in Gaelic, that's the important thing. And if the music and the literature has contributed to building a platform and creating a space where these people, these younger Gaelic speakers now feel more comfortable talking about this aspect of their life, then we've done something good. And the more the merrier.
Yes, couldn't agree more. Once again, this is such a conversation of first for me, because most of these topics are entirely foreign and new to me, and to be learning so much from one of my first solo interviews, I couldn't ask for more, to be honest. Thank you so much, Mark.
I'm enjoying talking to you. Thank you for having me today.
And I would ask you as a last question, how do you approach the creative process? As a person who appreciates music myself, I always think, how does a songwriter or a musician get his thoughts to write these as the lyrics? What would have inspired them? What would have been going on in their mind? Could you share your, how do you do the magic, as a poet and a bard, I would say?
It's something that's quite hard to quantify. I always, no offense to you, but I hate being asked this question. I think I'm a bit of a thinker and a meditator. I think a lot of my writing goes on in my head. A lot of it, I think we all do this, but a lot of it is in response to the world around me, and I try and be receptive to various media and other art forms, as well as what I'm seeing, on the news or stuff that I've read. I try and absorb it all. Another piece of advice that I was given quite early on was to just always make note of your ideas, and carry around a notebook or use your mobile phone to record things, because you never know when you'll go back to it. So I do try and do that, because you never want to lose that kind of creative spark, that first flash of inspiration. But I would say that in general, a friend of mine, Marianne, who I mentioned, she refers to it as a square jobby, which means that you tend to sit there and work on it in your head, and then it all kind of comes out in a flurry. And I'm somebody, when I'm writing a poem, I would say that the first draft comes out as it's meant to, and then I might I'm a bit of a tinkerer. I might move things around and tickle it, as it were, but I'm not somebody who goes through series and series of redrafts and stuff. That's generally the way that I work. When it comes to collaborative projects, there's various ways around it.
Sometimes and you have to accommodate a lot more people, and they're sort of working. Yeah, I get it. Yes.
Yes, I mean, with the music, sometimes I'm given a brief, somebody has an idea and they want me to help them shape it, or it might be that I'm given a beat that I have to write to, or there's been the odd time where I've been given a melody and I've been asked to put words to it. So that's what I love, actually. I started off very much, and it was very kind of self-led. It was all very much about my ideas, but actually, 10 years in, you get to a point where you want to try something new. And so that's why working with others is so exciting, because it introduces you to another way of looking at your creative practice.
Right. So, with that, I would like to end this conversation with Marcus, our guest this week. Thank you so much, Marcus. It's been a great pleasure talking to you, and I hope our audience feels the same.
Me too. What I would say in closing is please continue to support the petition to keep the languages departments open at Aberdeen, in particular the Gaelic department. Please do bear in mind that, this is a minoritized language. It needs all the support it can get. And I want to make clear that I stand completely with all the language students and staff. The effort is Herculean and heroic, and we cannot allow this act of cultural vandalism to progress unchecked and unchallenged.
Yes, completely agree. This culture, the language, and everything it represents cannot be allowed to be erased out of scholarship like that, especially at such a prestigious university as our own. So continue the support, guys. And thank you very much, Marcus, for your wise words.
No worries. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Have a lovely day. See ya.
Cheery.
Granite Talks. Conversations from Aberdeen is co-hosted by Anna Dvorakova, Nila Lohith Moudgalya, Raoul Plasencia, and Thomas Scuti. Co-produced by Ewan Smith and Thomas Scuti.